yes. At Cerritos Auto Square, it's a word we say more than anyone. Yes to the most new cars, and yes to the most used or certified pre-owned vehicles. So find just the yes you're looking for.
Cerritos Auto Square.
Welcome to the Sci-Fi Sci, a podcast about Black science fiction, fantasy, and staying on the same page in this marriage. I kind of like Ben. I'm one of your incredible co-hosts, Amber Wallen, and you?
I'm Ben.
Hey Ben, I like you. And today, welcome to episode 27 of the Sci-Fi Sci. We sat down and watched Meteor Man, what year did it come out, Ben?
1993.
Thank you, Boo. The 1993 hit, starring, directed, filmed, costume, makeup, designed, everything you can think of by Robert Townsend. And we have to get into this movie because it's so fun and it's both amazing and horrible in so many ways, and we're very excited to discuss it.
So Robert Townsend directs this, stars in it, does everything that, Amber, you're doing right now in your life.
Yes, I am the Robert Townsend of our home, you know what I'm saying, and my career. So it's like I'm the talent, I am the mic and tech lead, I sell the tickets, I do lighting,
You write everything.
I write everything, I do house cleanup, dishes, dog coordinator, plant mom. So I definitely, the spirit of Robert Townsend really speaks to me because some of us are just out here doing it all by ourselves.
And then
all by ourselves.
And then ridiculously flopping, which is what this movie did.
Some of us.
Some of us
are flopping.
Not referring to you at
right,
all.
Sure. The movie. Let's talk about the movie a little bit.
Right. So the budget was $20 million. It made $8 million at the box office. So considered a flop, definitely. However, I did find it quite fascinating that the films that were being made at this time, sort of the really big films, and The Meteor Man had a lot of famous characters and actors.
Oh, man.
A lot of actors.
If you were a famous actor in the 90s, you were in Meteor Man.
Famous black actor, I should say.
That's what I mean, what is this show all about?
Black. Science fiction. Blackness. Anyway, it only made $8 million at the box office, but I found it really fascinating when I looked at some other movies that flopped that year. So The Last Action Hero, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, he made that movie for like $83 million, and it was a complete flop as well. So just be aware that it is a lower budget for a bigger budget kind of film. I think we have such high expectations for superhero movies.
Now?
Yeah, very high expectations. And that it would just not be acceptable for some of the special effects or even the character development within the film. Like, we expect so much more. But that's sort of a little bit of the background. In the summary of this, very simply, so The Meteor Man is about a substitute teacher who works and lives in this rough Washington, D.C. neighborhood run by the Golden Lords. He is a passive, non-violent character who just likes to play his upright bass. He's, a musician on the side. And one day he gets struck by a meteor and gets these amazing superpowers. And then he uses those superpowers to rid his neighborhood of the vicious Golden Lords. So, Amber, what were some of your first impressions of this movie?
I know that when we first started watching the movie, I immediately started writing down every person that's really well known right now in Black Hollywood that I saw, and eventually I ran out of paper. So I enjoy seeing who was running the game in the 90s for Black Hollywood. So you got Jennifer Lewis, you got James Earl Jones, and you also have Don Cheadle. So you have like the big actor names. And then it was also really nice to see some famous musicians. So it's like, Luther Vandross, what the hell are you doing in here? Biz Markie. So one of my favorite things about that, where it kind of just felt like all hands on deck for this movie, life to be breathed into this movie. So I really enjoyed that to start. And I'll be honest, it was moving kind of slow for me, but it still had some like fun quirks and things from here and there. What were your first impressions of the movie?
I was very surprised about how goofy superhero movie this was, because, as I was saying, I expect so much of my superhero movies now to delve into some serious topics, right? We watched WandaVision, which there's a level of camp and goofiness, but it deals with some pretty serious themes of post-traumatic stress and dealing with the loss of a loved one. There are some really stressful ideas and not stressful, but no, yeah, I guess a lot of the superhero movies now are stressful. They're high anxiety, and this was just so goofy. When Meteor Man gets his superpowers, it's not just your Superman powers where, you have laser vision eyes, which he does have, and X-ray vision, which he does have, and super strength, which he does have, which are all Superman powers. But he also has this ability to talk to dogs specifically. Like, he has canine telepathy, not human telepathy, but canine telepathy. And the dog sort of sounds like a Wall-E sort of robot.
That dog sounds like Maya Angelou.
Yeah, really?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought it was more robotic in the sound.
Jefferson, run. Jefferson, run. It's like, what? This little, lassie dog wouldn't have that voice, but sure. And you know who probably was the voice actor of that dog? Robert Townsend, if I had to go guess. Yeah. He does it all. He's a trailblazer, though.
So that was my first impression. It's just goofy.
It's interesting because when something is the first of its time, which this movie was, there hadn't been a black superhero movie before Meteor Man that we can find, right?
Yes, he was planning on this being the first black superhero movie. There was one blaxploitation film. I think it was called The Black Superman. Literally called The Black Superman. I think it was like Abbar, The Black Superman. But it was shot in a trap house. And it was directed by a white dude, but written by a black man who, during the shooting of the scene, I remember reading about this, the police kept on showing up because they didn't have filming rights,
permits.
So when I read about this, it was saying that this is the first black superhero feature length film. I don't think that technically is correct because of the movie The Black Superman, which I'll put in the comments. I watched some of it, and it literally looks like the characters in it are reading off line cards when they're doing their scenes.
The cue cards, yeah.
Yeah, they're so bad. Meteor
Man, without a doubt, is the first black superhero movie written and directed by a black person. So we'll give it that, at least, right? And so I feel like when you're the first person to do something, you feel this pressure to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there because you don't want a black audience to be like, why didn't he put this and this and this about our black experience? I can see Robert Townsend, the gears turning of him feeling the pressure to do that because there was so much. Even right now when we're talking about the superpowers, he has X-ray vision, super strength, the ability to start earthquakes, wind. He can see through clothes. He can see through bodies. He can talk to dogs. It just, he could fly. It got to the point where you're like, okay, what was in this motherfucking meteor that gave you all of these abilities? And then we'll talk later about this. Spoilers, if you have not seen this. At some point, he's used so many of those powers that then he can't use them anymore. And then he can, and you get a little bit lost in oh yeah, he can do these 7 powers. So suffice it to say, Robert Townsend threw everything and the kitchen sink into this film. Starting from the superhero's powers to the neighborhood. But we'll get there.
Yeah, well, yeah, let's jump into some of the themes in it. One of the greatest themes is, I wrote it down because I recently learned this phrase from you, is there's this theme of knuck if you buck, but if you don't buck, then no knucking.
Oh my God. No one says the second part of how you just described it, so why don't you say what you mean?
What I mean is that if you're not willing to put your fist up, then keep your head down.
So it's if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Well, it's also like if you're going to talk trash, you have to be willing to actually fight and throw down as well.
For sure.
And so part of this substitute teacher's philosophy, Jefferson Reed, which he's not a real teacher, he's a substitute, which that just itself is so tickling. Right in the beginning, he's telling all his kids, like, don't fight, don't be violent, keep your head down and walk away. And it causes this really cute kid to like get in a cast, get the shit beaten out of him. And the mom comes in. Jennifer Lewis comes in really angry, being like, I try to teach my kid to stand up. Like, in the hood, if you don't stand up for yourself, you're going to get beaten up. And the principal sort of stands on the side of the parent, which is completely different to how bullying now would work at a school. Like if there's a bullying issue that happens outside of the classroom, never in a million years would a teacher get blamed for that unless a teacher is inciting the bullying. But if a teacher is saying no, like, walk away, go tell a teacher, everything that
eat rapidly is what he told
he tells us. Yeah, he tells us eat rapidly. But I don't know, it just made me think a lot of like my own upbringing, which was very much don't be confrontational. And
your parents said that to you?
Yeah, of course. Like if someone got upset at me, apologize, walk away.
If someone let's unpack what you're saying. If someone gets upset at you, your parents told you just apologize and walk away?
Yeah.
But what if they unjustifiably got upset with you?
Well, my mom would always say, like, you don't know who has a gun on them, and there are crazy people out here. Like, it's better to
she's
live.
Not wrong, but wouldn't they shoot you anyway if they were crazy?
Not if they're not triggered.
But some people are unjustifiably triggered.
I mean, then you still need to get away from that situation. Confronting someone when they're confronting you will elevate the situation.
Always is what you were taught.
Yeah.
Do you believe that now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I would much rather live to, walk another day.
That actually really makes a lot of sense for our relationship. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to confront you even if I believe that you're wrong, which most of the time I actually believe you are wrong. But I'm not going to shoot you. You have to know that. Yes. Yes, I think so. Just kidding.
So that logic doesn't work. Like, but what if I need that confrontation, that I need to hear the honesty that day? You'd rather still just walk away?
Well,
because I might have a gun?
No, that's ridiculous. No, I think it's more this idea of your time is precious. Like, we are on this earth for a very, very short time. Mm-hmm. And we have no memory before we were born, and we'll have no memory when we're gone. Like,
this is your belief.
I mean, no, this is fact. Do you remember before you were born?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't tell you about that.
Okay. Well, when you die, it's over. There's nothing, we know what happens to bodies when they die. They decompose, and that's it. The atoms inside you will break apart, and that will turn into organic matter. And then, so like, we know what happens to our bodies when we die, and we'll have no consciousness. Even if you believe that there is life after death, it's not going to be any kind of life that we experience now. So, that being said, I want to extend my life as long as possible, and I want to value my time as much as possible. And I think this idea of non-confrontation, which is Jefferson Reed's entire belief at the start of the movie, is a way to live a long time and not waste your time, sort of getting into unnecessary fights. But I think he learns that he can't do that with his superpowers. That's sort of his arc. One of the big arcs is that now he has all this power, so should he just stand idly by? Because he sort of does want to. He doesn't really want to be thrust into this position of power and responsibility.
Well, the last thing I'll ask you about that for you personally, because, this movie is letting us discuss and get to know each other better. Do you think that most to all confrontations are inevitably a waste of your time? Because that's the big thing for you, time. I don't want to waste my time. I walked away from this confrontation because it was a waste of time. But what if it wasn't?
Well, he's teaching his children in a very specific context of school, right? Where you're non-confrontational in school because of the threat of physical violence. And what I found sort of counterintuitive is that because he didn't fight, this boy ended up getting hurt, right? Like, what I believe is that if you walk away, you're less likely to get hurt. But what this mother believes, Jennifer Lewis believes, is that if you don't fight, you end up going to get more hurt. So specifically in this DC neighborhood, this DC rough neighborhood.
Right, but I'm asking you, do you personally think that most to all confrontations are a waste of your time? Which is why you don't.
Well, yeah, there's different kinds of confrontations, right? There's an individual confrontation with a stranger, which in this context is where I think, yeah, that'd be a waste of time. Then there's societal confrontations or political confrontations involving, say, I'm part of the Chicago Teachers Union. I would find it valuable to confront Lightfoot and her cronyism, or her, how do I describe the things that Lightfoot does? Lightfoot uses children as pawns to get what she wants politically, right?
Okay.
And I think that's
society, and now me.
And then there's somewhat, confrontations with people that you have on a personal relationship, and the confrontations don't work when you're confronting. Instead of I look sort of using a restorative conversation, which is very different than confronting, saying you did this thing
it's
wrong.
Semantics.
I think it's very different to say confrontation has this basis in accusation and assuming that what this person did is the complete, honest to God, unlawful, wrong. That's it. Like, I'm going to confront you because you did this thing wrong.
So you see confrontation as more like aggressive.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, we're going to have a heated, constructive conversation.
Right.
Got it. Okay. That actually clears up a lot for me.
Well, did you get into fights in school? Like, did
No.
people try to fight you in school, middle school?
Yes. I mean, I definitely had like bullies here and there, and there were times where I was afraid to stand up for myself for fear of getting in trouble, at school. And then when I would go home, my dad would be like, if someone gets in your shit, like, you need to stand up for yourself. We will deal with the consequences. But I just vividly remember him telling me, like, I know you so well, you follow rules, like, and not that I'm his perfect little angel, but like, if somebody's just in your face and just preying on you because you're a nice kid, like, tell them what it is. So I didn't get into physical fights, but I would definitely be like, hey, that's my lunch. Like, no, it would be something like that.
That's very intriguing for me because Jefferson Reed is not a rule follower. He's not a rule follower, but he believes in non-confrontation. I think we're sort of led to believe that he's a passive, almost weak man. Yes,
they paint him to be very weak. And now his weak defenses are actually detrimental to himself and to kids.
Yeah, but also at the same time, his decision to be a kind person, to be a kind teacher, at one point addresses one of the children from the Golden Lord. So another theme in this is children are used as pawns by the Golden Lords. So can you just summarize who the Golden Lords are? Because I think you might be able to fit in quite nicely with them.
I will. So the Golden Lords is a street gang that all have blonde, like bleach blonde hair. So I would be a Golden Lord if you have seen any recent picture of me. And they recruit little kids, and then they have middle-aged, teenagers, and then they have adults in the group. So it's very organized, like most gangs, but they all dress alike, and then they all have the same hairstyle. So there's something so I don't want to say Nation of Islam, but I vividly know when I see someone who is in that religious group, like from a child to an adult to, you know, from a child to an adult, there are some very clear physical markers from like the bow tie to the suit to the haircut. And so there was something like that gave that element to this group. I know there are plenty of other organizations that do that, but even like street gangs, there might be like one color that they all wear, but they all wear it differently. So these just looks like, you know, many kids and many men. And the ringleader was played by Don Cheadle, and his name was Goldilocks from the Golden Lords, which we love.
Yeah, Don Cheadle is not the leader.
Okay, well, he's like second in command.
Yeah, he's like in second in command.
You are splitting hairs with me today.
Well, yeah, I just didn't want anybody to say that, you know, we're wrong. But
because you don't want confrontation.
I don't want that is correct.
Yeah.
I don't want confrontation.
Yeah, well, he's like second in command. I mean, he's the person that is actually carrying the guns around. I feel like he was also the one who was most in control most of the movie. Like when we were first introduced to the Golden Lords, it was Don Cheadle and two other guys. Mm-hmm. We don't meet this other figure until like the final fight at the end. But like his name forgets me because Goldilocks was like the main person.
Yeah.
And also, you know, no shade, but Don Cheadle is the more famous actor that we know now. So.
And Goldilocks is a great villain name.
I mean,
like, oh, it's genius.
Because Goldilocks is a motherfucking villain. She broke into somebody's house, started eating their food, sleeping in their bed, and for some reason the bears are the ones to blame.
Yeah, I do want to talk a little bit about the kids because they're so cute. Like they got actual children to play like the child golden
baby lords,
but they're called baby lords. So there's baby lords, and then there's the teenagers who are like preteens or like, oh yeah, beat them up, and then you do have adults. So that you do see this entire arc of that. But one thing that I found really fascinating was the baby lords sort of run drugs with their lunch boxes. So they have these like cute little lunch boxes. And I thought that was very accurate, and it's played for laughs because they sort of do look like actually I was thinking they sort of dress them up like Black Panthers. I was like, ooh, okay. I just found that very
leather and black.
Yeah.
Well, it just makes sense for a gang to wear a dark color. Like, you know, if you're running the streets at night, nobody's gonna walk around in like a lavender purple. Like that just makes no sense.
But then to dye your hair bleach blonde, that seemed a little bit like a misstep. I think
I'm sorry? Is it a misstep to dye your hair bleach blonde?
Well, if you're trying to sell, you know, drugs or run guns under
in a
cover,
sci-fi world, the bleach blonde hair makes sense. It was pretty fantastic, actually.
So the other thing is Jefferson Reed still lives at home with his parents or like lives in the same building with them. And his dad is sort of the complete opposite of him and is very confrontational. And for no reason at one point, like sees these Golden Lords early in the movie sort of, you know, selling crack cocaine in those little crystal vials, and he like knocks it out of their hand and steps on it. I'm like, does this man want to die?
He thinks he's cleaning up the streets, baby.
Yeah, but that sort of gets into this whole theme of neighborhood autonomy. And at this time, when I read a lot of the rhetoric that was coming out of the 90s, like black writers and black powerful black figures, is that they really were saying like, we need to take responsibility of our neighborhood. We're the ones that should be policing it. We should be the ones, you know, building the community gardens and building up the infrastructure of our neighborhoods. And that was sort of the idea, and that movie taps into that. But I just keep on thinking like how ridiculous that is. Like, that is not how...
That black people need to keep our own neighborhoods? I don't think it's that ridiculous.
I think it's ridiculous to expect a neighborhood to build up itself on its own. Like, for example, think about this, right? Let's talk about Lincoln Park, all right? You go through Lincoln Park. Did the Lincoln Park community call up Starbucks, call up these other companies and say, hey, come move into our neighborhood and build this here? Did they call up nice private schools, that nice independent school right next to the Lincoln Park Zoo, say, hey, come build your school here? No, that did not happen. These businesses made those decisions without, the influence of the larger community. The community is not paying Starbucks to build and stay there, and they're not paying these nicer grocery stores, and they're not paying that nice sushi restaurant to move it in there.
The demographics of the community do drive those things to happen, though.
The demographics, but it's not like this personal responsibility. And at this time, it was understood that Black people should be cleaning up their own neighborhoods. It's, in my mind, like, no, the city of Chicago should be cleaning up the neighborhood. Yeah. Businesses should be the ones building and starting a Starbucks. No community could pool enough money together to start a own I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. I just think that Black communities would and have thrived in that way. We have to know that, with like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, like these communities and even 50s, 60s South Side Chicago was its own like thriving entity and infrastructure. But it is then the larger government that comes in and causes chaos in those communities. That's why they're suffering a lot of the time. I bet if those Black communities were left the fuck alone and did depend on each other for food and for banks and all of that, they would thrive. So, and I think Black people are charged with the responsibility to do the neighborhood watch and everything like that now is because we don't want to call the cops because somebody might fucking die. So I just don't think it's ridiculous to say. I think culturally speaking, it actually does make a lot of sense. And you've said in the past too, if we think about indigenous communities, they thrive on their own and they have their people who have positions that align with their beliefs, like a shaman or something, and everybody respects that person. And so I don't know. I just think it's a little uninformed to say it's ridiculous for communities to keep themselves.
Well, now it is. From what we understand from the 90s and what was going on in the 90s, I'm talking specifically when Jefferson Reed's father confronts the drug lord, the Golden Lord, because now we understand, the reason that these Golden Lords are dealing drugs and the reason why the neighborhood is not cleaned up has nothing to do with the Black residents there.
So you're saying if that was isolated, it would not be ridiculous?
I don't think it would be, because it's not isolated.
Right.
I mean, even Black Wall Street thrived, past tense, but it did not continue to thrive, right? And why didn't it continue to thrive? Because it was destroyed and demolished.
Yeah.
So even Bronzeville, right? Like Bronzeville struggles, it's completely different compared to the South Loop and the infrastructure that's being provided there. They're building up at Mariano's, and they're trying to do and revitalize certain parts of, right off the Green Line there. But again, that can't happen purely by the community.
I got you.
Right? And so sort of
given
that's
the current state. Well, I thought we were talking about this fictionalized movie, but I see what you're saying, because it is based.
But even then, right? Because at one point they're having this big community meeting, and they're like, we're going to create a neighborhood watch. And, there's big sections of the film that takes place in these community meetings. And at one point, sort of a funny side note is that there's no secret identity for the Meteor Man. Once he gets his powers,
have to have a whole sidebar about that. But I'm with you. Keep going.
So they're like, okay, Meteor Man, you're gonna protect us now. You're our superhero. And I just think that even if the Meteor Man were to get rid of all the Golden Lords and turn all the baby lords into good, upright citizens who read W.E.B. Du Bois, even then, that wouldn't work because you're still not dealing with the infrastructure.
I agree with you there.
And now we know that. We know that now.
Yes. Now let's get back to what you just said about Meteor Man's identity. What the fuck? Sorry.
That costume was awesome, though.
Oh, he had an awesome costume, and then we read this great article. We'll put it in the description box about this guy who interviewed Robert Townsend and was like, do you still have this outfit? And he's like, I can't fit it anymore. It's in the back of my closet, but I can still fit the boots. Anyway, Robert Townsend is, I'm literally trying to think right now of another superhero that does this, but he does not hide his identity. Jefferson Reed, Meteor Man, does not hide his identity in the movie. And it's and that's how it starts. Whereas like every other superhero movie that we've ever seen, when they have their big origin story, the one thing they're trying to do is like, I need a mask. Like I'm vividly thinking about when Spider-Man first fought in that wrestling arena to start making money. And so it was really cool to see, oh, what would happen if you didn't hide your identity? Because you are this peacekeeper and savior for the community, and they do want to see your face and they do want to know you. And you know, we're watching Black Lightning right now to prepare for the next season, which it's like 100% hide your identity no matter what. They can't know who you are. So it was really nice to like watch these two bodies of work side by side, with Meteor Man being like, oh, I mean, I'm not wearing a mask, like they gonna see this smile, which is just so Robert Townsend, I think.
Also, the fact that you really cannot keep a secret in this type of community. Like even at the beginning of the movie, Robert Townsend walks in and he sees, you know, one of the great characters, Ernest, who's played by the great James Earl Jones, and everyone has their door open in this you know, I guess.
Community.
This, you know, it's like a 3-story walk up, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone just keeps their door open. You know, it's a stoop life, you know, and there's no secrets. And
I love it. I wish communities were like that now. Our last building was sort of like, you know, you would see the same people and say, hey, but it would never be like we could just have the door open. Yeah,
it's a very different world now, but yeah, I think that's just also, it fits into Robert Townsend's character, but I think it also fits into this DC neighborhood that he's trying to create as well.
It's interesting that this neighborhood has so much danger and crime, but everybody still has their door open.
Yeah, it's sort of this idea, I think, again, dealing with the 90s, because they mention it in the film, that we need to kick out these drug lords, as if the drug lords weren't part of the community, as if the drug lords aren't people, young men who couldn't find jobs, whose moms live in the community, as if the drug lords did not go to the schools in the community. It was this idea that these drug lords are coming into our neighborhood and
they're
invading, and they're separate from us. And I think it's, of course, way more complicated. But again, 2020 hindsight. I do want to talk a little bit about this community garden, where Robert Jefferson Reed is struggling.
Robert Jefferson Reed?
Yeah, Robert Townsend Jefferson Reed Pierce III. I think he's struggling, and this is what I think the movie does well, is he really struggles with embracing the Meteor Man identity, you know, and that's a big arc of superhero films, is that, you know, how do I use my powers for good? To what extent do I use them for good? And he's like, I really don't want this responsibility, and he doesn't like going around and fighting. And so one of the ways that he decides not to fight is he uses his powers to clear out all the trucks in this like abandoned lot, and he uses his powers to like run quickly up and down and plant this like beautiful garden, and then he uses this like electrical power to make a pumpkin the size of a building, and it's really really cute. And I wish they delved more into that goofiness. Like he uses his laser vision to like fry eggs and stuff. I was like, oh man, like I wish they leaned more into that. So I don't know, because you were like all into the community garden, like.
Well, it was just so cute. I mean, it was just such a kind gesture, and such him, because that took him from being like very weak and dormant and passive to like, you really want to do some good in the world. There was actually one scene where Robert Townsend's, I'm not sure if you said this yet or not, but his car was broken into and somebody stole his upright bass. And the minute that he came outside, saw that there was glass shattered everywhere, he took a deep sigh, saw some trash on the ground on his sidewalk, and just picked the trash up and recycled it like angrily. And so you started seeing just a little bit of that, like, oh, well, you're not just like weak and non-confrontational. You're actually really just wanting to do well for the environment and be a good person and leave some sort of legacy behind. And I think that community garden really showed that he's like, I want to use my powers to breathe life and development into my community, which I loved.
I like how the film toys with us because we almost at one point mistake Robert Townsend's kindness for weakness.
Yes.
And it's not. And he has a really solid relationship with his mom. And his mom makes his costume. He tries on all these like really goofy costumes.
Like a fashion montage.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
It's great. At one point I think he has like a coriander on his head and like think of all the things that you could go into your kitchen to make as a superhero, which I would do all the time. I would steal my mom's kitchen knives or like
a cheese grater or something.
Yeah, or like use a pot to put on my head as like a metal, hat or something. It was great.
And I loved that moment was just like so Black and exciting. Like if I was a mom and my son had gotten hit by a meteor and he became a superpower, we would be like, oh my God, now you need a bat signal and let's get you a little phone so that people can call you and then let's get you a costume. So that was really fun to see his family really rally around him. And then, then eventually the neighborhood as well. They're like, you got to come to these community meetings and we're going to vote and fight and make change. And it was just a feel good. Some of those scenes lingered, I'll be honest. It was just like, okay, what's the actual plot? Like, who are the villains? We felt that at times. We were like, what? How long has it been running at this point?
It's a long movie for an hour and a half, which I think that's how long it is. I feel
it's only an hour and a half?
Yeah, it's...
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long movie for an hour and a half. There is this great line where his dad is getting so excited of the possibility of what, his son can do, Jefferson can do. And he says, maybe you could go international and deal with South Africa. And you're like, oh yeah, apartheid in South Africa was a thing at this time. That was a nice time capsule moment there. I do want to talk about this whole idea of gang unity. There's a montage of the Meteor Man fully accepting his superpowers, and he goes in and uses his hurricane blowing power, hurricane wind power, to blow all this like cocaine and destroy all this cocaine. And he gets all the drug dealers super high. It's a great scene. And he calls them drug people. He
just breaks into this crack house. It's interesting because in this universe, there are the Golden Lords, and there's also the Bloods and the Crips. And he's just all about gang unity and strength, which worked off really well.
Yeah, so the gang unity comes between the Crips and the Bloods. He unites them using his superpowers, but then he sort of shows that, we should also have tough on crime policies as well. And so he beats up all the Golden Lords. So the movie sort of falls into like, yes, and type of thing.
Yeah, because there was a scene where there was about to be a showdown between like all these police officers and the Bloods and the Crips. And he like stands in the middle of the street, one of those middle of the street at night scenes. And they're all about to shoot Meteor Man. And he's like, hold your weapons. Why don't we come together and have a conversation or something that he said there to just like clean up the streets.
Yeah.
There were hella villains in this movie. It's like, is it the Bloods? Is it the Crips? Is it the cops? Is it the Golden Lords? Like I said, everything went into the Meteor Man soup.
It was also weird watching that now because from what I understand in the 90s, there were these larger like gang organizations, and now, at least in Chicago, there's a different gang on different streets, right?
Different blocks.
There's not like a unity. And I remember reading a fair bit about this at one point, but this idea of bringing gangs together and unifying them and working with the police, that was something that was sort of teased with a little bit in the 90s and then eventually just discarded. Like, we're just going to arrest everybody and, put them in prison for life and sort of fracture any sort of gang hierarchy. And now it's just really kids, it's imagine just baby lords and the teenage lords running everything. And that was sort of weird, like remembering that, oh yeah, at one point this was seriously considered as a way of dealing with gang violence is like having gang members sit down and talk with each other. And now it's sort of like, arrest them all, put them in prison.
Do you think that's a conversation that should be revisited? Like cops and gangs working together? Or do you think it's just like that's so far gone that it's probably never going to happen?
You know, I there's an organization or sort of justice organization. It's called, I think it's called Circles and Ciphers. And they're a Chicago-based organization, and they sat down, did a whole conversation about keeping specifically young men of color out of gangs, and they do that through alternative means like, you know, hanging out and rapping and doing things, doing events together, helping, you know, setting them up with jobs and doing restorative justice conversations. And the guy who, one of the leaders of this, says, yeah, we just don't talk to cops. We never talk to cops. It's so fractured. This was they sort of did a conversation at Loyola, and there was a cop on the panel, and the guy was like, yeah, we just don't talk to cops. It's no good. The community is completely fractured. And this was sort of right around where John Burgess, the notorious Midnight Crew leader, he was a man, I guess from, I think maybe from the 70s to the 90s, who just round up young black men, just torture them. And Chicago ended up paying reparations to a lot of these families, a lot of these people, where the Chicago Police Department union has sort of stand John Burgess this whole time. And John Burgess never faced any consequence. He died.
This is a white
he
guy?
died. Yeah, he died in Florida.
So this is a white guy who would round up black kids and kill them?
Not kill them, torture them.
Torture them?
To get, you know, information. Yeah, it was awful. Yeah, I'll put the link.
Families of those children were paid reparations.
And the individuals as well. This happened 2015, maybe 5 years ago. It was fairly recent. I remember sitting on this panel and him, you know, the people saying, yeah, we don't talk to cops.
Yeah.
It's just not an option anymore. And it's weird watching this, that at some point, you know, this is, you know, during Michael Jackson's time where he was singing about world unity, right? Like this is the 90s of that time, and where we could actually come together as a country.
Yeah, the heal the world
type of thing. And yeah, that doesn't happen. I think what can happen is maybe, you know, restorative conversations between gang members, younger kids, you know, a lot of these gang members, middle school, high school, they could come together. They can sort of be brought to an understanding. Hey, like you can work with people. You don't have to, you know, have a gun and deal drugs or whatever. I think that's a possibility, but
not like police to gang.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Random side question. Who do you think is our meteor man of today? Even if it's a woman or someone who's non-binary. Like someone having the conversations and trying to like bridge those gaps.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that America is obsessed with, that an individual can sort of bring about this change. And we were talking about this, that it's so silly in my mind, the amount of individual responsibility that we think humans should have. Like, there's this viral clip of these libertarians talking about like what should be the. You want to share that?
Yes, it was on TikTok, and the question was like, "What's the most insane political party moment that you've seen?" And then so somebody just responded to that, and it was this like these three libertarians who were being asked like, do you think someone should take a driver's test or take some sort of government test in order to get a driver's license? And the first man was like, hell no. And the second man was like, what's next? You need a license to put toast in your own toaster? And then the third guy's like, well, I kind of think that you should have some sort of competency when it comes to those driving on the road with others. And the whole crowd just like booed this guy.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because you're like, wait, what?
Well, yeah, and I think America celebrates the individual right as like the greatest thing. Like an individual can have all this power and can bring unity. And that is not the question we should be asking ourselves at all. Like, I think it's a fine question. Like, what is the Meteor Man who can bring unity and, you know, really bring America together? And that's a very American
start
question.
That conversation.
I don't think it's not an individual.
I know, but you don't think one person sort of has the finesse to get that conversation started and bring those parties together?
I don't think so. I think you have to have groups of people who write up, you know, group kind of contracts that deal with this. It's not an individual that can unite and bring people together. I guess, like, specifically, like, I don't know, what do you mean by, like, what is a meter? Like, bring what kind of unity? Are you talking about, like, unity between Republicans and Democrats? Or are you talking about healing, you know, distrust between, like, a single individual healing distrust between Black communities and the police departments that police them? Like, what are you talking about? Or all those things?
I'm talking about what Meteor Man did. So it's like the authorities with the community.
In Chicago?
We got Black Jesus. I think he could do it.
Oh.
We got Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton can do any fucking thing. We got Beyonce, who is, you know, really stepped into her Blackness in the last decade. So she has the power.
Something that I've been thinking a lot about is that Beyonce is not a single individual, right?
Of course not.
And Dolly Parton is not a single individual. They have an entire team behind them. But it's very interesting for me when I think of how people celebrate individuals in this country. I don't know.
I'm triggered by this question. You can't just have a little fun and say, like, this is the person I would listen to. It would be Toni Morrison for me if she was still alive.
Yeah, but Toni Morrison, white people would not let Toni Morrison unite them and bring them together. You know, like, you have to find somebody. First of all, it couldn't be a person of color to bring the unity. Like, if you're talking about an individual, no white person is going to listen to a Black leader.
They listen to Beyonce.
I don't think so. Not really anymore. Not since she did the whole Black Panther costume at the Super Bowl. People were infuriated by that.
Yeah, sorry.
Right?
I was like,
she made
what?
She made a
like
choice.
The actual historical political Black Panthers.
Yeah.
I was like,
you need...
She dressed as Chadwick Boseman at the Super Bowl?
No, yeah, you need some... Yeah, it would have to be a white person.
Yeah, sadly, yeah.
I don't think.
They don't listen. Why y'all don't listen, Ben?
All right, let's go through some, like, tertiary characters that we really haven't,
because literally
we haven't talked about. Them. All right, so Sinbad. Sinbad makes a guest appearance, who very briefly, Jefferson Reed has, like, a love interest, but it turns out she is dating Sinbad, and the love interest storyline is immediately dispelled, which is great. There's no love interest. We don't
need a love story. That was so refreshing.
Well, I was hoping maybe the Meteor Man falls in love with Sinbad, aka Malik, and that would be the love story.
Sinbad was fucking hilarious. Like, he basically played this, like, Hotep guy, so he had on his, like, dashiki and his hat, and he was, like, over courting this woman who is now his girlfriend. He was like, you know, hello, my queen, do you need anything, whatever. And then he whispers over to Meteor Man, like, you know, I just discovered my Blackness. This is my first Black girl. I'm really getting in touch with my roots, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was so funny. I mean, Sinbad, if Sinbad's in something, just, like, go pee before the movie, because that was hilarious. He wasn't a huge part of the movie, but I'm glad he was in there.
And then also we have, despite Meteor Man coming out as Jefferson Reed, people don't recognize that he's Jefferson Reed. Like, the white anchors, or, like, the white people don't know who Meteor Man is, which is sort of funny. I think he's playing with, like, all Black people look alike.
Yeah.
So this man named Clarence, played by the legendary John Witherspoon, gets on TV. He's like, I'm Meteor Man.
I'm Meteor Man.
I'm Meteor Man.
That was me. I can't even do a good John Witherspoon, but I was closer than you.
And I was like, oh, this movie has these moments that are just genius, because it taps into, like, this idea that Black people look all alike. It allows John Witherspoon to just be John Witherspoon.
Yeah.
And
you can't write a script for that, man. You have to say, like, John, will you please be a part of this project? This is the essence of what your character is going to do. You got to improv all of it. I would be hard pressed to find if John Witherspoon ever actually memorized lines. Because what he has to say is far more comedic, far more, ingenious than anything anybody could write.
Agreed.
We love you, John.
And then finally, we have this old nurse who is taking care of the Meteor Man when he first gets struck by the meteor, which the special effects for that was really awesome. It looks like
really good.
Looks like the thing.
Yeah. Little John Carpenter vibes.
It was great.
You were impressed.
LaWanda Page is this great comedian, and she shows up as this old nurse who ends up hitting on Jefferson Reed, which that whole scene though goes really nicely into our size. Whenever I read a classic science fiction book, I'm just so disappointed how women are treated. And I'm like, oh yeah, workplace harassment training is still a fairly new concept. The Me Too movement is still a new movement. So for example, one of the sides I have is that Jefferson Reed, when he first realizes he has X-ray vision, he uses it to look under women's clothes. And he tries to call in this nurse who's taking care of him so he can look underneath her clothes. Instead, he gets LaWanda Page, who is hilarious.
Also an icon.
But I immediately saw Jefferson Reed as a complete sleaze. And he does it again where he first learns how to fly, and he peers into a woman getting changed, and he sort of smiles like a fucking creep. And I'm like, oh, this was just behavior that was accepted back then. But I immediately was turned off by the whole thing. That was one of my sides.
I wasn't immediately turned off just because I know it's classic. On the scale from, 1 to very creepy, very strange. I mean, Bill Cosby was in this movie, and every scene we were just oh God, these parts are... Even he would do something small and you're just but you're a monster. So there's that. So... on a 1 to 10 scale, I didn't find it incredibly offensive because it's just it's the 90s, but I totally understand what you're saying. But there was also a funny part. So Eddie Griffin is his best friend in the movie, and that really pretty nurse comes in and checks on Meteor Man because he's been, attacked by this meteor, and now he's in the hospital and all these bandages. Eddie Griffin's you okay, man? I'm just here to help. And then he leans over to the nurse. He was like, what time you get off? And it was just so funny. I know it's but he's hitting on this nurse and she's just trying to do her job, but we know why that nurse was cast in that role. Also, Beverly Johnson was one of the nurses. She's an insanely popular model. She was one of the first black women on the cover of Vogue, I want to say.
I think she was the nurse that he was trying to look
No, it was different. Beverly Johnson was another doctor. So this whole, all of the budget went to casting.
Some other sides I had was the idea of the gangs having their hair blonde.
Why is that a side?
Because it was just made it so unbelievable. That leads a really high profile. If you are trying to run guns or trying to run drugs, you're not even going to have an afro. Everything is going to have the same haircut.
I know, but I can suspend disbelief. Meteor Man got hit by a meteor and can fly, speak to dogs, do telepathy, look through bitches' clothes. I can suspend disbelief and say a little mini gang that they've created in this universe all have blonde hair.
Sure.
And it made them very there goes a baby lord.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think I would have recognized them without those traits.
Okay.
But you just didn't like the hair? You really hate my blonde hair, don't you?
No,
I wish you would have told me.
Your blonde hair
I'm
is
not gonna
great.
change it.
Your blonde hair is great. Just don't become a golden lord wearing black leather and shooting up people who sucked up a meteor. Another side I had is the way the powers work are a little confusing. There's no explanation why the Meteor Man loses his power.
Nope.
Because the meteor sucks inside of him. Think of the inverse of The Thing when it or Alien, if you've ever seen Alien, when the alien pops out. Think of the inverse of Alien, where the alien baby goes inside. So that's what is happening with the meteor. And he loses his power, but he can gain it by touching a different piece of meteor, but he only gets it for a little bit. And that is never, ever explained. So,
Yeah. Or even like the meteor shower was very random.
yeah.
Or did that happen in other parts of the country? Or was there a meteor shower that only hit Washington, D.C.? We don't know.
Well, the movie started with this explosion in space that sent the meteor to Earth. And I think we're sort of led to believe that there's maybe an alien species and in future films, because the other side had was Robert Townsend said he was hoping this to be like $1 billion franchise. Like
yes. But it did. To Robert Townsend's credit, because again, I have a special place in my heart for Robert Townsend, because I too am a Robert Townsend thinking like, this project is amazing. You know, I'll send an audition and be like, this is my best work. There's no way I'm not going to get this role. And then I don't get it. But I will say that he is correct that this movie did eventually reap millions because of like with that article interview that we read about him, how there have been so many like creative sons of Meteor Man, Black Lightning, Black Panther. Like none of those would have happened without us looking at Meteor Man and piecing apart like what worked, what didn't. Now we can breathe life into other Black superheroes. So yeah, like maybe it didn't, his box office and his bank account didn't see that change, but it did. Like long term, those dividends like multiplied 10 times over, because Black Panther was one of the most, iconic, like beat Titanic at the box office. And we have to give Robert Townsend some credit for that. Like who knows? Like in another world, maybe Black Panther would have been made, but it would have been a lot different. Or Black Panther would have been the first flop, like Meteor Man was.
I think Meteor Man deserves a remake. I think they could do like a funny but more serious Meteor Man and bring back. So I would love to see that.
Who would be the Meteor Man now? Since you don't want to answer the last one.
Oh, like as a character?
As the character. Who would do great in this role?
Oh, yeah. So I think the actor who plays Black Jesus would be amazing.
Really? What's his name?
I don't remember. He's a comedian though, but I think he would be great. I think you need sort of more of like a skinnier, because he's really tall.
Yeah.
And like, muscular. I think you need
a
skinnier,
like a soft, dormant, weak guy to play the Jefferson Reed at the beginning.
More of like a nerdy dude. Jefferson Reed reminded me a lot of the main character from Soul.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh yeah. Especially because he played the upright bass and he really loved jazz. His dog's name was Ellington. After Duke Ellington. Like the opening scene was him getting into his brother's like jazz collection and asking him about, which we will get to. You already started some sides, but we are going to, for the first time ever, James Earl Jones is a Psy. But who else do you think? I think that they would probably cast Donald Glover as Meteor Man.
I think Donald Glover would be great.
He's the perfect like nerdy, quirky, but could also do it because he did great as Lando Calrissian.
Yeah, let's talk about James Earl Jones because
James Earl Jones. Icon, Mufasa, Coming to America, The Sandlot, Fences, the original Broadway production. We could go on and on about Darth Vader. Ben just whispered to me Darth Vader. For real? I thought Darth Vader's voice was just like... Well, it doesn't matter. James Earl Jones. Why are you face palming? I think if I had pulled somebody to the side and said, like, what are James Earl Jones' like top 3 movies, they would say Darth Vader. Maybe
We're gonna go to a bar tonight, and we're gonna do that tonight.
Deal.
I'm gonna walk to a bar tonight.
Okay.
Yep, I'm gonna do that.
Let's fucking go.
We should
post it on Patreon too.
Let's do it right now.
Okay, I'm down to do that.
Come on. There's a bar.
Wait, we have to finish the podcast.
Okay, go for it.
James Earl Jones' character was completely wasted. He played Ernest Moses. Robert Townsend is just the perfect name. Meteor Man's neighbor, and his whole bit was that just he like switched out what wig he wore. Like he's trying out new wigs, trying to be young and hip and cool, and he has like a dope record collection. But that's not someone you get to play like James Earl Jones should be playing. James Earl Jones should be playing a major role. Like he is not no motherfucking extra. He's not a tertiary character. He's not a supporting actor. He is James Earl Jones. So I just thought that it was just a waste of such incredible talent. Like, you could see James Earl Jones trying to make something out of nothing, but it ultimately resulted in nothing. I think if Robert Townsend looks back over his life, like, he should go to sleep at night being like, damn, I played James Earl Jones and I fucked that one up.
Well, James Earl Jones also knows how to throw a record with incredible aim, which he does at one point to save and help the Meteor Man. But other than that, he does nothing in the movie.
I really think people would say, like, Mufasa in Coming to America.
We're gonna take Gucci to a friendly bar.
You really want to do this?
It's a 20-minute walk. We'll go. We'll grab one beer. We'll ask the question.